For Euro USD, gold, which is XAU USD, and silver, which is XAG USD, you should only trade these pairs in US session, and it's really, really simple, the actual zones that the banks use. So it's literally just previous US highs and low zones. It's as simple as that. So if to show you right now, I'm actually back in November, October of 2021. Now I'm doing this because I have a YouTube video which I privated on my channel, but this was back in the end of 2021. I made, I think it was a K or a couple K, just off of one US session zone, which was a zone right here. So this bit of price action in these couple weeks was the nicest I've ever seen, and it's the perfect way for me to show you how you can use US session. So this is for Euro USD, gold and silver. Now it's a bit different for GJ, EJ and GA. It's a bit different in US session, so it's going to have its own separate video there. So really quickly and simply, what do we have? So if I go over to Monday, the 18th of October, initially, well, actually, you can see the day before that, it was just simple US session, bounce off of that zone right there. This is just how it works. It's literally just US session zone to US session zone to US session zone. So this next one on the 18th of October, I'm just going to draw the high on like that. And what you will see from this point is that the next day, price didn't come into the zone because it just didn't move down there. But what it did do is it created that high right there. And then the next day, what happened? Well, price went from exactly that US zone to exactly the US zone up there. Now, what you need to do to find US zones is just look to the left. What happened in US session the last time the EU traded this price? So if you look to the left, you'll see we had that zone right there. Then the next day, price tapped into it again. Didn't really do much because it just created a low there, but it did create a US high up around that zone there. And then the day after that, what happens? Tap into that US high, come all the way down, back into this US high that we created. So this is the fourth time this zone has been rejected in US session. And then from this point, what happens? Well, price breaks below, and then twice more. So the following Tuesday and Wednesday, price taps perfectly into this zone once more and then sinks to the downside. So you can see just through these, how many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 days here, how every time US session tapped into this zone, it rejected because the banks use these zones in US session. So the North American banks know the zones they're going to use. And you can see that after this point was created, every time US session tapped into this zone, it rejected. So these are the zones that we need to be aware of when trading EU, gold and silver. So this is how it works in US session. I'll also point out we have this zone down here which was created, and that was then consequently rejected on Thursday. This was news though, and absolutely flew to the upside. So these zones, it's so simple when I draw these on. It's just like artwork how it moves. And then from this point here, we created that low, which you can see was then rejected a few days later. And then the day after, I'm just drawing on these zones here just to show you how it moves. We created that high there, which was then rejected, and it dropped to the downside. We had this low down here, which the next time price tapped into it, it rejected. I think this zone actually, yeah, this zone right here was the one which I made a really easy K off because it tapped into it so many times. So the first time was on Monday, the 1st of November, and we created that low. And then again on the Wednesday, price tapped into it, rejected, then flew to the upside. Then on the Thursday, the day after, what happened? Well, US session opened below and it pushed into the zone, rejected, then sunk all the way down to the next US session low down there, which we drew on. And then the day after that, what happened? Well, we clearly still had that zone on, price rejected it, then dropped to the downside, then found support around here, so it would have been a US session zone around there somewhere, and then it pushed off to the upside. But where was the high for that session? Well, again, it was that one US zone we had. So that's 4 times in a row US has tapped into that zone, it's rejected. But that's not even the end of it. If I drag it across, you can see the next 3 days, every time US taps into this zone, it bounces off. So on the Monday, price bounced off to the upside. On the Tuesday, price bounced off to the upside. And then on the Wednesday, this was a massive sell-off. This was one that I caught on the 1K thing. And then it dropped to the downside. So you can see with 2 zones right here. So first of all, we had this zone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All 6 times that price tapped into it, it rejected. And then when it broke out, it did a break and retest. So 6 times in a row, it rejected that one zone. And then we go over to this one here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All 7 times price tapped into it, it rejected. And you can see that it's actually in Asian and London in which price breaks through it. So it was over here and then over here. And then as soon as US opens, it taps in and then drops to the downside. So this is really simply, and now if I just drag this across just to show you even more, that is where price tapped into the high from these zones up here. So all you're doing for these pairs is what are the previous US session zones. So it's really, really simple for these pairs, which is why I really do recommend you trade them in US session. So this is just the same for gold and silver, as I'm going to show you right now. On silver right now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually show you videos from the silver and gold course, because there are some very nice videos on there on how price actually moves. But really quickly, the past few weeks, what's happened on silver, it's just the same as Euro USD. You can see on this Monday, we created a high. We then tapped into it the following day, break and retest, push off to the upside. Then the following day, created that high. The following day after that, tapped in and then dropped to the downside. This zone right here, this was a buy. I think I actually did this live. From the last time that US was in this price, which was all the way back there. That is the last time that US was at this price. What happened? Well, price sunk to that zone, rejected, then pushed off. But then if we take this across, and the US low for that point, all that happened was that once price went below, did a break and retest off that zone, dropped to the downside. And you can see time and time again, US rejects the same zones time and time again. So as I said, I'm going to show you the videos from the gold and silver course because that will help you a lot. Now I'm on silver right now. I'm on the 1 hour because it's probably the best I can use, the best time frame I can use to show you exactly what I'm talking about with this strategy. And what I've done is I've labeled off in the yellow boxes are all the US sessions we've had since the start of March. I'm recording this on the 7th of April, and these are all the US sessions since the start of March. Now, all I'm going to do is show you in as simple as possible. You are about to see how simple this is, exactly how correlated each US session is to the other. Now I'm back on my zone rectangle tool, and what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to draw on these lines and you're going to see just how correlated they are. So to start off with, the 2 first US zones, you can see we had a clear support zone there. It was the start. It started off with this session here was support. So that when we came into this day, that was the previous day's US low. And what we do, we tap into it and we bounce off. But it wasn't just that. The actual real move was that right there. As you can see, the previous day's US high was rejected and bounced to the downside. But hang on, if I drag this all the way across, you can see the next time US tapped into this zone, which was on the 7th, a couple of days after this one, price tapped in, rejected, and bounced to the upside because this was a previous US zone. And when we come back and we tap into this US zone, we bounce up because these zones are the zones of high importance and a high chance of rejection. So US highs and lows for a particular session are of importance. And as you'll see on this day here, the one we just talked about where it bounced off of this US zone, we had this US high zone right there. Let's drag that across. You'll see the day after the next US session, what did we do? We came all the way down. We tapped perfectly into the previous day's US high, and then we bounced massively to the upside. That was a huge buy opportunity, a huge trade, the biggest one of the year. So that was that. But what we also can see, if we drag this across right here, like that, is that the zone we just had, in which price rejected it twice, and then came back and bounced up for the 3rd rejection, the next 3 times US taps into this zone, so once there, we have there as well, and then we break below in London session, US comes and taps in and then smashes to the downside. So just a little bit extra here. Once we had broken below in London there and US was starting, US opened below this zone, all we were expecting was a tap into this zone, a rejection to sell off. That's exactly what happened. I caught this one myself, and I'm sure plenty of others did as well, because these US zones are the zones which are rejected on the lower time frames. These are our key lower time frame zones. You can already see this one zone here. Every time US has tapped into this zone, it has rejected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times this zone rejected. Now, if we move on to the next bit of price action, the day right here created this US low zone right there. What did price do? Price came up, rejected it, then dropped off a little. There wasn't really a trade in there because it was at the end of the day when it tapped into that. But what we can see is that we can just edit that a little bit. So when we were going into this day here, this was another trade that I caught. But also for this day, we had this US low right here. And what happened on this day, this was 2 trades available on this day, the 16th of March. Price, the market opened, it tapped into this zone here, which was the previous day's US high. Also the day before that US low, we dropped down to the previous day's US low zone right here, rejected that and bounced off to the upside. And then the day after, we had this bit of price action here. There was no volume, but it did tap into a zone, which if I show you, if I just drag that across, the zone was that zone right there. You can see that is a US zone. So the rejection, something you need to know, the rejection comes in the whole of these wicks here, the lower wicks. So the rejection is in the wicks. Rejection isn't just one price point, say 25.8 dead, and that's the only rejection. No, it's the whole wick between the body close and the end of the candle, the lowest one for the session. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But then what do we have after this session? Well, this session created a US low, which was just in there. Drag that down a little bit. Created a US low in there. And what do we see? The next 2 days, they bounce off of that US low to the downside. But then, hang on, we had on this day right here, on the 18th, we had this US low right there, which as you can see, on the following day, price came, tapped in and bounced up to the upside. But then the next day, you should be seeing what's happening here. Each of these US zones keeps on getting rejected over and over again into the future. The next day, where did price reject off? Well, remember this zone from earlier. If I drag that all the way across, price tapped perfectly into that zone and bounced to the upside in US session, because this was a previous US session zone times 2. You should really be seeing how the markets are moving right here. So next, if on this day here, what you can see is if I drag that one across, price came in, tapped in, and then bounced to the upside, because again, this is a US session zone. And then on this day, we created that US high right there. And what happened? Break and retest. The next day, London broke above, US started up there, it came back, tapped in, rejected, and a big push off to the upside, because it's a US session zone. Now, next of all, if I drag that on there all the way across, what can we see? The following day after this big move, we had that rejection of this US zone and then push to the upside because it's a US session zone. And then the next day, we had the rejection of that zone once again in US session. You should be seeing very well how these markets are moving right now. Well, that is not it, because we still have this bit of recent price action here, which is even nicer. So on this day, which I show you right here, we had this US low right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that all the way across. And as you can see, rejection the next day. Well, it wasn't rejection. That wasn't a selling opportunity, but it did create the US high zone for that day there. Then the next day we tap in and then we push off to the upside. There just wasn't much volume in that day, but we did push off to the upside. But the day after that, drag that across, price came, it tapped in to start US, then pushed off upside until this point right there, the previous day's US high, and then we rejected that. So you really should be seeing how these markets are moving right here. As I'm showing you, it just bounces between US zone to US zone. Something I will point out is that these look small here, these little movement, these sessions here, they look small and pretty low volume. But what you remember is I'm on the hour here. We like to catch trades on the 5 minute. That is not small. These sessions here, they just look very big because we're in a period right now where there's a lot of volume. There's a lot of money to be made in these sessions here. They're not small, they just look small compared to the others, and because we're on the 1 hour. If I drag this across, what you'll see is that the next 2 times US tapped into this zone, tapped in, rejected to the downside, tapped in, rejected to the downside. 2 more easy trades there. And now you can see how these sessions move on silver and gold. It's so simple. It just bounces between session zone to session zone, session high, session low. You'll see the same zones rejected over and over again, as I have shown in this video here. I'm also going to show gold, but as you can see by all these zones, there is so many opportunities to buy and sell in these zones. These session highs and session lows, they have over 80% chance of rejection. And that's before you factor in your higher time frame bias. You can have a serious win rate using these zones, because this is how the big players and the big banks move the markets in US session on silver and gold. Gold and silver, they move in the same theory. They don't move exactly the same though. But if one's bullish, the other's bullish. If one's bearish, the other's bearish. But there's always kind of a little bit of movement difference, which means if you can't find the trade on gold, you may be able to find it on silver, and vice versa. If you can't find the trade on silver, you might be able to find it on gold, because there is a little bit of difference. And we will see sometimes gold taps into a US zone and rejects, whereas silver doesn't quite make it. But what this means, we just have another opportunity to get in a trade. So instead of just trading gold, we've got silver there as well, just in case we can't find a trade. So we're able to get more trades by trading both. So as I've said, it's exactly the same. I've already drawn on all the zones right here. And you can see, I started this off back at the start of March yet again. And what you can see, if I just zoom in a little bit, like that, you can see just the same again, US zone, rejections, 2 lovely break and retest there. And then as you can see right here, we had a triple little rejection there. Also a rejection of the previous day's US low, and then a rejection of the previous day's US low again to the downside. Really just going through it quickly here because there's nothing much else I need to say. This is really simple, really simple. That is the beauty of it. All you need to be doing is drawing on your US zones. Now, this video isn't about how to draw them on. I'm just showing you an overview of how these pairs do move. Now, this US session zone right here is very crucial. Now, there wasn't a trade in this US session. This was the 14th of March. But what it did give us is the US low and the US high for that session. And as you'll see, these two came into very high importance. Price came all the way back in this one time, tapped into the US high exactly, and then dropped off to the downside very hard. Also, we had this US low zone right here, which, if I just zoom in a bit, you can see price came tapped in perfectly and rejected to the downside. The next time price came in, it rejected. There wasn't a trade there again because it was the end of the session. But what it did do is it allowed us to buy from this zone in the next US session once we closed above, and then also buy in the session after that. There wasn't much volume there, but it was 2 buys there. But then we came below, came back for the retest of this zone, and then dropped to the downside from there. And also the next time we came into that zone, we tapped all the way up, rejected, and then dropped off to the downside. But also in this little bit of price action here, you can see zone after zone, US zone high after low gets rejected time and time again, many times. If you just look at this yourself, or even if you draw this on your chart yourself, you will see again and again these zones get rejected. That's just an overview of how gold and silver move in US.